Hello everyone, welcome back to Read Along Saturday, and today we are continuing with our book The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. Chapter 9, Concerning a Civil Principality. But coming to the other point, where a leading citizen becomes the prince of his country, not by wickedness or any intolerable violence, but by the favor of his fellow citizens, this may be called a civil principality. Nor is genius or fortune altogether necessary to attain to it, but rather happy shrewdness. I say then that such a principality is obtained either by the favor of the people or by the favor of the nobles, because in any and all cities these two distinct parties are found, and from this it arises that the people do not wish to be ruled or oppressed by the nobles, and the nobles wish to rule and oppress the people. And from these two opposite desires, there arises in cities one of the three results, either a principality, self-government, or anarchy. A principality is created either by the people or by the nobles, accordingly as one or other of them has the opportunity. For the nobles, seeing they cannot withstand the people, begin to cry up to the reputation of one of themselves, and they make him a prince, so that under his shadow they can give vent to their ambitions. The people, finding they cannot resist the nobles, also cry up to the reputation of one of themselves, and make him a prince as to be defended by his authority. He who obtains sovereignty by the assistance of the nobles maintains himself with more difficulty than who becomes to by the aid of the people, because the former finds himself with many around him who consider themselves his equals, and because of this he can neither rule nor manage them to his liking. But he who reaches sovereignty by popular favor finds himself alone, and has none around him or few who are not prepared to obey him. Besides this, one cannot by fair dealing and without injury to others satisfy the nobles, but you can satisfy the people, for their object is more righteous than that of the nobles, the latter wishing to oppress, while the former only desire not to be oppressed. It is to be added also that the prince can never secure himself against a hostile people because of there being too many, whilst from the nobles he can secure himself as they are few in number. The worst that a prince may expect from a hostile people is to be abandoned by them. But from hostile nobles he has not only to fear abandonment, but also that they will rise against him. For they, being in their affairs more far-seeing and astute, always come forward in time to save themselves, and to obtain favors from him whom they expect to prevail. Further, the prince is compelled to live always with the same people, but he can do well without the same nobles, being able to make and unmake them daily, and to give or take away authority when it pleases him. Therefore, to make this point clearer, I say that the nobles ought to be looked at mainly in two ways. That is to say, they either shape their course in such a way as binds them entirely to your fortune, or they do not. Those who bind themselves and are not rapacious ought to be honored and loved. Those who do not bind themselves may be dealt with in two ways. They may fail to do this through pusillanimity and a natural want of courage, in which case you ought to make use of them, especially of those who are of good counsel, and thus whilst in prosperity you honor them, in adversity you do not have to fear them. But when for their own ambitious ends, then they shun binding themselves. It is a token that they are giving more thought to themselves than to you, and a prince ought to guard against such and to fear them as if they were open enemies, because in adversity they always help to ruin him. Therefore, one who becomes a prince through the favor of the people ought to keep them friendly, and this is he can easily do, seeing they only ask not to be oppressed by him. But one who, in opposition to the people, becomes a prince by the favor of the nobles, ought above everything to seek to win the people over to himself. And this he may easily do if he takes them under his protection. Because men, when they receive good from him of whom they were expecting evil, are bound more closely to their benefactor. Thus the people quickly become more devoted to him than he had been raised to principality by their favors. and the prince can win their affections in many ways. But as these vary according to the circumstances, one cannot give fixed rules, so I omit them. But I repeat, it is necessary for a prince to have a people friendly, otherwise, he has no security in adversity. Nabis, prince of the Spartans, sustained the attack of all Greece and a victorious Roman army, and against them he defended his country and his government. And for the overcoming of this peril, it was only necessary for him to make himself secure against a few. But this would not have been sufficient that the people been hostile. And do not let anyone impugn their statement with the trite proverb that he who builds on the people builds on the mud. For this is true when a private citizen makes a foundation there and persuades himself that the people will free him when he is oppressed by his enemies or by the magistrates, wherein he would find himself very often deceived, as happened to the Gracchi in Rome and to Messer Giorgio Sacchi in Florence. But granted a prince who had established himself as above, who can command and is a man of courage, undismayed in adversity, who does not fail in other qualifications, and who by his resolution and energy keeps the whole people encouraged. Such a one will never find himself deceived in them, and it will be shown that he had laid his foundations well. These principalities are liable to danger when they are passing from the civil to the absolute order of government, for such princes either rule personally or through magistrates. In the latter case, their government is weaker and more insecure because it rests entirely on the goodwill of those citizens who are raised to magistracy, and who, especially in troubled times, can destroy the government with great ease, either by intrigue or open defiance. And the prince had not the chance, amid tumults, to exercise absolute authority, because the citizens and the subjects, accustomed to receive orders from magistrates, are not of a mind to obey him, and among these confusions, and there will be always be doubtful times in scarcity of men whom he can trust. For such a prince cannot rely upon what he observes in quiet times, when citizens have need of the state, because then everyone agrees with him. They all promise, and when death is far distant, they all wish to die for him. But in troubled times, when the state has need of his citizens, then he finds but few. And so much the more is this experiment dangerous, inasmuch as it can only be tried once. Therefore, a wise prince ought to adopt such a course that his citizens will always, in every sort and kind of circumstance, have need of the state and of him, and then he will always find them faithful. That was chapter number 9. Let's discuss this a little. So, the core concept of chapter 9 was how a private citizen becomes prince of his native city by the favor of his fellow citizens without wickedness or foreign aid. So, there are two paths to power. First one is favor of the people. People desire not to be oppressed by the nobles, so they choose one amongst themselves. Second path is favor of the nobles. Nobles desire to oppress the people and elevate one of their own to lead them. Now here Machiavelli says that it is much easier and more secure to rule with the support of the people. People are a single, easier to satisfy entity. They just want not to be oppressed, right? Nobles are few, ambitious, and constantly seeking power, making them harder to control and are more dangerous. Now, holding power. Prince, supported by the people, needs only to keep the people well disposed. Prince, supported by the nobles, must win over the people later or be very wary of the nobles who might turn on him. He must also watch nobles who are hesitant or ambitious. Now, a wise prince must always seek to secure the friendship of the people, as they are his ultimate strength and defense in adversity. Chapter 10. Concerning the way in which the strength of all principalities ought to be measured. It is necessary to consider another point in examining the character of these principalities, that is, whether a prince has such power that in case of need he can support himself with his own resources, or whether he has always need of assistance of the others. And to make this quite clear, I say that I consider those who are able to support themselves by their own resources, who can either by abundance of men or money raise a sufficient army to join the battle against anyone who comes to attack them. And I consider those always to have need of others who cannot show themselves against the enemy in the field, but are forced to defend themselves by sheltering behind walls. The first case has been discussed, but we will speak of it again should it recur. In the second case, one can say nothing except to encourage such princes to provision and fortify their towns, not on any account to defend the country. And whoever shall fortify his town well, and shall be managed the other concerns of his subjects in a way stated above, and to be often repeated, will never be attacked without great caution. For men are always adverse to enterprises where difficulties can be seen, and it will be seen not to be an easy thing to attack when one who has his town well fortified and is not hated by his people. The cities of Germany are absolutely free. They own but little country around them, and they yield obedience to the emperor when it suits them. Nor do they fear this, nor any other power they may have near them, because they are fortified in such a way that everyone thinks the taking of them by assault would be tedious and difficult. Seeing they can have proper ditches and the walls, they are sufficient artillery, and they always keep in public depots enough for 1 year's eating, drinking, and firing. And beyond this, to keep the people quiet and without loss to state, they always have the means of giving work to the community in those labors that are the life and strength of the city. And on the pursuit of which the people are supported, they also hold military exercises in repute, and moreover have many ordinances to uphold them. Therefore, a prince who had a strong city had not made himself Odysseus will not be attacked, or if anyone should attack, he will only be driven off with disgrace. Again, because the affairs of this world are so changeable, it is almost impossible to keep an army a whole year in the field without being interfered with. And whoever should reply, if the people have property outside the city and see it burnt, they will not remain patient, and the long siege and self-interest will make them forget their prince. And to this I answer that a powerful and courageous prince will overcome all such difficulties by giving at one time hope to his subjects that the evil will not be for long. At another time, fear of cruelty of the enemy, then preserving himself adroitly from the subjects who seem to him to be hold. Further, the enemy would naturally on his arrival at once burn and ruin the country at the time when the spirits of the people are still not hot and ready for the defense, and therefore so much the less ought the prince to hesitate. Because after a time when spirits have cooled, the damage is already done and ills are incurred, and there is no longer any remedy, and therefore they are so much the more ready to unite with their prince, he appearing to be under obligations and to them now that their whole houses have been burnt and their possessions ruined in his defense. For it is the nature of men to bound by benefits they confer as much as those they receive. Therefore, if everything is well considered, it will not be difficult for a wise prince to keep the minds of his citizens steadfast from first to last, when he does not fail to support and defend them. So, let's discuss chapter 10 in brief. Now, the core concept is how strong is principality and his prince, particularly in times of attack. Two types of principality strength. First, self-sufficient. Second, require external aid. Now, the self-sufficient one, a prince who can, when necessary, stand on its own feet by having sufficient men and money to raise a proper army and fight off any attackers. Machiavelli advises such princes to fortify the city and provision it, as this is their best defense. He cites German free cities as examples. Second one was requiring external aid, a prince who needs to rely on the help of others to defend himself. Now, key advice for self-sufficient princes is to fortify your capital city strongly, keep it well supplied with provisions and water, maintain a strong and loyal populace that supports the prince, as well as fortified city with a good spirit and extremely difficult to besiege. People are reluctant to undertake a long, difficult siege. especially if the prince is not hated by its own people. Main point of this chapter was that the ultimate measure of a prince's strength lies in the ability to defend himself without outside assistance, especially by having a well fortified and well provisioned capital city and the loyalty of his people. So true. Moving on to chapter 11 concerning ecclesiastical principalities. It only remains now to speak of ecclesiastical principalities, touching which all difficulties are prior to getting possession, because they are acquired either by capacity or good fortune. They can be held without either, for they are sustained by the ancient ordinances of religion, which are so powerful and of such a character that the principalities may be held no matter how the princes behave and live. These princes alone have states and do not defend them, and they have subjects and do not rule them. The states, although unguarded, are not taken from them, and the subjects, although not ruled, do not care, and they have neither the desire nor the ability to alienate themselves. Such principalities only are secure and happy. But being upheld by powers to which the human mind cannot reach, I shall speak no more of them, because being exalted and maintained by the God, it would be the act of presumptuous and rash man to discuss them. Nevertheless, if anyone should ask of me how comes it that the church has attained such greatness in temporal power, seeing that from Alexander backwards to the Italian potentates, not only those who have been called potentates, but every baron and lord, though the smallest, have valued the temporal power very slightly, yet now a king of France trembles before it, and it has been able to drive him from Italy and to ruin the Venetians. Although these may be very manifest, it does not appear to me superfluous to recall it is some measure to memory. Before Charles, King of France, passed into Italy, this country was under the dominion of Pope, the Venetians, and the King of Naples, the Duke of Milan, and the Florentines. These potentates have two principal anxieties: the one, that no foreigner should enter Italy under arms; the other, that none of them should seize more territory. Those about whom there was the most anxiety were the Pope and the Venetians. To restrain the Venetians, the union of all the others were necessary, as it was from difference of Ferrara, and to keep down the Pope, they made use of the barons of Rome, who, being divided into two factions, Orsini and Colonnesi, had always the pretext for disorder, and standing with arms in their hands under the eyes of pontiff, kept the pontificate weak and powerless. And although there might arise sometimes a courageous pope such as Sixtus, yet neither fortune nor wisdom could rid him of these annoyances. And the short life of a pope is also a cause of weakness, for in the 10 years which is average life of pope, he can with difficulty lower one of the factions, and if so to speak, one people should almost destroy the Colonnesi. Another would arise hostile to the Orsini, who would support their opponents, and yet would not have time to ruin the Orsini. This was the reason why temporal powers of the Pope were less esteemed in Italy. Alexander VI arose afterwards, who of all the pontiffs had ever been showed how a pope with both money and arms was able to prevail. And through the instrumentality of the Duke Valentino, and by reason the entry of the French, he brought about all those things which I have discussed above in the actions of the Duke. And although his intention was not to aggrandize the church, but the Duke, nevertheless, which he did contributed to the greatness of the church, which after his death and the ruin of the Duke became the heir to all his labors. Pope Julius came afterwards and found the church strong, possessing all the Romagna, the barons of Rome reduced to impotence, and through the chastisements of Alexander, the factions wiped out. He also found the way open to accumulate money in a manner such as that has never been practiced before Alexander's time. Such things Julius not only followed but improved upon, and he intended to gain Bologna to ruin the Venetians and to drive the French out of Italy. All these enterprises prospered with him, and so much the more to his credit, inasmuch as he did everything to strengthen the church, not only any private person. He kept also that Orsini and Colonnesi factions within the bounds in which he found them, and although there were among them some mind to make disturbances, nevertheless, he held two things firm. One, the greatness of the church, with which he terrified them, and the other, not allowing them to have their own cardinals who caused the disorders among them. For whenever these factions have their cardinals, they do not remain quiet for long, because cardinals foster the factions in Rome and out of it, and the barons are compelled to support them, and thus from the ambitious of prelates arise disorders and tumults among the barons. For these reasons, His Holiness Pope Leo found the pontificate most powerful, and it is to be hoped that if others made it great in arms, he will make it greater and more venerated by his goodness and infinite other virtues. That was chapter 11. Let us discuss chapter 11's key points. Core topic: Principalities ruled by the church. Unique nature: it is the easiest principality to acquire and hold, but they are unique. Acquisition is they are acquired either by virtue or fortune, but once acquired, they are maintained by ancient religious institutions, which are so powerful and entrenched that they sustain the prince regardless of his actions. Machiavelli famously states that these princes hold states without defending them and have subjects without governing them. And their states, though undefended, are not taken from them, and their subjects, though ungoverned, do not care, do not think of alienating themselves from them. The power of the religion comes in play. Their stability comes from the deeply held religious beliefs of their subjects, making them incredibly secure. Machiavelli then briefly discusses how the temporal power in Italy grew significantly, particularly under Pope Alexander VI and Pope Julius II, who consolidated the territory and eliminated rival factions. This allowed the church to become a major political force, and sometimes it wasn't for centuries prior. The main point here is that ecclesiastical principalities are anomalous, relying on immense unshakable power of religious institution rather than conventional political or military strength, making them the most secure form of the rule. So that was it for today. I will see you next Saturday. Until then, keep watching and keep reading.